Before we dive into the relationship between nature and business, we need to introduce some basic frameworks and influences that shape the climate agenda and ESG reporting. In this video, we will explore the concept of climate stability, how it relates to human activity, and common tools used to measure business climate impact. Let's dive in. In summary, climate stability refers to the state of our planet's climate system being in balance, with minimal disruptions caused by human activities. To understand climate stability, we first need to understand that climate change is primarily a result of human activity. This understanding comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also known as IPCC. The IPCC is a globally recognized scientific body that brings together experts from around the world to assess climate change. Their research tells us that human activities, such as burning fossil fuels and deforestation due to agricultural activities, have significantly contributed to the changes we observe in our climate. Based on the IPCC's fifth report, it is extremely likely that more than half of modern warming is caused by humans. And by extremely likely, we mean a probability range of 95 to 100%. In fact, since 1850s, almost all the long-term warming can be explained by greenhouse gas emissions and other human activities. So what are the governments and businesses doing to combat climate change? Each year, representatives from various nations attend a series of meetings called the Conference of the Parties, or COP. These gatherings provide a platform for global discussions on how to tackle climate change. One of the key goals discussed at COPs is to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is considered the best-case scenario. However, it is important to note that different scenarios will have different impacts on our environment. Higher warming will, for instance, result in a much significant sea level rise, which imposes a great risk for businesses in big coastal cities. In 2015, the international community came together in Paris to address climate change. This COP resulted in the historic Paris Agreement, where nearly every country pledged to take action to limit global temperatures rise and adapt to the changing climate. But how can businesses know how to reduce their carbon emissions and set targets that will deliver the desired impact? Basically, how do we know we are on the right path to achieving the Paris Agreement? Since this was a common question, the Science Based Targets Initiative, SBTi, was born. It is a collaboration between CDP, the Climate Disclosure Project, the United Nations Global Compact, the World Resources Institute, and the WWF, through which science-based targets were developed. The SBTi provides a framework for companies to set targets that are based on the best available science and are consistent with keeping global temperature rise well below 2 degrees Celsius. But how do the companies calculate their carbon emissions? For that purpose, the Carbon Accounting Protocol, as a standardized framework, was developed by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. The protocol establishes a consistent way to measure and manage greenhouse gases, or so-called GHG emissions. It provides businesses with a structured and consistent approach to quantify and report their carbon footprint. This sounds complex, right? How can businesses account for all the emissions in their operations, including supply chains? That is why the protocol covers three main categories of emissions, known as scopes. Scope 1 emissions include direct emissions from owned or controlled sources, such as fuel combustion. Scope 2 emissions encompass indirect emissions from purchased electricity, heat, or steam, while Scope 3 emissions cover indirect emissions from activities outside a company's control, such as supply chains and business travel. The protocol also outlines specific methodologies for calculating emissions within each scope. It guides businesses in data collection, emission factors, and calculation formulas to ensure consistency and accuracy in measuring emissions so they can develop comprehensive GHG inventories and report their emissions. This allows stakeholders, including customers, investors, and regulators, to evaluate companies' environmental performance and progress over time. Thanks to the protocol, businesses can benchmark their emissions performance against industry peers, national averages, or specific targets. Using a commonly established framework facilitates meaningful comparisons and can lead to sector-wide emissions reductions. While the frameworks and methodologies for establishing science-based targets to curb greenhouse gas emissions exist, they are not yet universally adopted, and even these frameworks have their limitations. For instance, while Scope 1 and 2 emissions are commonly reported on and even mandatory to disclose for companies in many jurisdictions, reporting on calculating Scope 3 emissions or double counting remain widely discussed in the business communities.